नमस्ते, सभी लोगों का सायंकालीन सत्र में स्वागत है। भंते अमरासिरी हमारे बीच में उपस्थित है, तो सबसे पहले हम उनका सम्मान करते हुए 3 बार प्रणाम करेंगे। लेट अस पे अवर रिस्पेक्ट बाय बॉविंग डाउन 3 टाइम्स। प्रणाम, द्वितीय प्रणाम, तृतीय प्रणाम। सत्र की शुरुआत करेंगे भंते जी की अनुमति को लेते हुए। भगवान बुद्ध की प्रारंभिक वंदना एवं अर्पणा। योऽसो भगवा अरहं सम्मा सम्बुद्धो स्वाखातो येन भगवता धम्मो सुपटिपन्नो यस्य भगवतो सावकसङ्घो तं मयं भगवन्तं सधम्मं ससङ्घम् इमे हि सकारे हि यथारहं आरोपिते हि अभिपूजयाम। साधु नो भन्ते भगवा शुचिर्परिनिभूतोऽपि पश्चिमा जनतानुकम्पमानसा इमे सकारे दुःखतपन्नाकारभूते पटिगणहातु अम्हाकं दीघरतं हिताय सुखाय अरहं सम्मा सम्बुद्धो भगवा बुद्धं भगवन्तम् अभिवादेमि। स्वाखातो भगवता धम्मो धम्मं नमस्सामि। सुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावकसङ्घो सङ्घं नमामि। अन्धमयं बुद्धस्य भगवतो पुबभागनमकारं करोमसे नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स। अन्धमयं बुद्धानुसतिनयं करोमसे शङ्खोपन् भगवन्तम् एवं कल्याणो कीर्तिसद्दो अभुगतो इति पिशो भगवा अरहं सम्मा सम्बुद्धो विद्याचरणसम्पन्नो सुगतो लोकविदु अनुत्तरो पुरुषधम्मसारथि सत्तादेव मनुष्यानं बुद्धो भगवाति। अन्धमयं बुद्धाविकीर्तिं करोमसे बुद्धवारहन्तवरतादिगुणाभियुक्तो शुद्धाभियान करुणा हि समागतत्तो बोधेशियो सुजनतं कमलं वसूरो वन्दामहं तमरणं शिरसा जिनेन्द्रं बुद्धो यो सब्बपाणिनं शरणं खेमं उत्तमं पठमानुसतिष्ठानं वन्दामि तं शिरेणहं बुद्धस्साहस्मि दासो वा बुद्धो मे सामि केसरो बुद्धसाहं नियादेमि शरीरं जीवितं चिदं वन्दन्तोऽहं चरिष्यामि बुद्धस्यैव सुबोधितं नत्ति मे शरणं अय्यं बुद्धो मे शरणं वरम् एतेन सच्चवज्रेण वध्येयं सत्तु शासने बुद्धं मे वन्दमानेन यं पुण्यं पशुतं इध सपेऽपि अन्तरायामे माहेषुं तस्य तेजसा कायेन वाचाय चेतसा वा बुद्धे कुकम्मं पकतं मयायं बुद्धो पटिगणहातु वचयन्तं कालान्तरे संवरितुं वा बुद्धे अन्धामयं धम्मानुसतिनयं करोमसे स्वाक्षातो भगवता धम्मो सन्दिट्ठिको अकालिको एहि पस्सिको औपनयिको पचतं वेदितव्यो वियूहिते अन्धमयं धम्माभिगीतिं करोमसे स्वाकाततादिगुणयोगवशेन सेयो यो मग्गपाकपरियत्ति विमोक्षभेदो धम्मोऽकुलोकपतनात् तद्धारि वन्दामहं तमहरं वरधम्ममेतं धम्मो यो सप्तपाणिनं शरणं खेममुत्तमम् द्वितीयानुसतिष्ठानं वन्दामि तं शिरेणहं धम्मसाहस्मि दासो वा धम्मो मे सामिकेशरो धम्मसाहं नियादेमि शरीरं जीवितं चिदं वन्दन्तोऽहं चरिष्यामि धम्मस्यैव सुधम्मतम् नत्ति मे शरणं अय्यं धम्मो मे शरणं वरम् एतेन सच्चवज्रेण वर्धेयं सत्तु शासने धम्मं मे वन्दमानेन यं पुण्यं पशुतं इध सपेऽपि अन्तरायामे माहेषुं तस्य तेजसा कायेन वाचाय वचेतसा वा धम्मे कुकम्मं पकतं मयायं धम्मोपटिगणहातु वचयन्तं कालान्तरे संवरितुं वा धम्मे अन्धमयं सङ्घानुसतिनयं करोमसे सुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावकसङ्घो उजुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावकसङ्घो न्यायपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावकसङ्घो सामीचिपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावकसङ्घो यदिदं चत्वारि पुरुषयुगानि अष्टपुरुषपुद्गला एष भगवतो सावकसङ्घो आहुनेयो पाहुनेयो दक्षिणेयो अञ्जलिकरणीयो अनुत्तरं पुण्यखेतं लोकस्यति हान्दामयं सङ्घाभिगीतिं करोमसे सधम्मजो सुपटिपत्तिगुणादियुक्तो यो अष्टविदो अरियपुग्गलसङ्घसेठो शीलादिधम्मपवराशयकाय वन्दामहं तमरियान् गणं सुश्रुतं सङ्घो यो सब्बपाणिनं शरणं खेममुत्तमम् तृतीयानुसतिष्ठानं वन्दामि तं शिरेणहं सङ्घसाहस्मि दासो वा सङ्घो मे सामिकेशरो सङ्घसाहं नियादेमि शरीरं जीवितं चिदं वन्दन्तोऽहं चरिष्यामि सङ्घसोपटिपन्नतं नत्थि मे शरणं अय्यं संघो मे शरणं वरं एतेन सत्यवचेन वचेयं सत्तु शासने संघं मे वन्दमानेन यं पुण्यं पशुतं इध सभ्येऽपि अन्तराया मे माहेषुं तस्य तेजसा कायेन वाचाय वचेतसा वा संघे कुकम्मं पकतं मया यं संघोपटिगणहातु वचीयान्तं कालान्तरे संवरितुं वा संघे। इसके उपरांत एक रिफ्लेक्शन का पाठ करेंगे। सच्ची एवं मिथ्या शरण हान्दमयं खेमा खेम शरण गमन परिदीपिका गाथायो भणामसे आए हम क्षेमवान एवं क्षेम रहित शरण की व्याख्या का पाठ करें। बहुं वे शरणं यन्ति पवतानि वनानि च आराम रुक्ष चैत्यानि मनुष्या भय तज्जिता बहुत प्रकार की शरण में जाते हैं जैसे पर्वतों वनों बगीचों पेड़ों चैत्यों में वे मनुष्य जो भयाक्रांत है न एतं को शरणं खेमं न एतं शरणं उत्तमं न एतं शरणं आगम्य सब दुःखापमुच्यति यह शरण क्षेमवान नहीं है उत्तम शरण नहीं है ऐसी शरण में जाने से सभी दुखों से मुक्ति नहीं होती यो चा बुद्धं च धम्मं च संघं च शरणं गतो चत्तारि अरिय सत्यानि समप्पय्याय पश्यति जो बुद्ध एवं धम्म तथा संघ की शरण जाता है तथा चारों आर्य सत्यों का सम्यक प्रज्ञा से दर्शन करता है दुःखं दुःख समुत्पादं दुःखस्य च अतिक्रमं हरियं च अठ अंगिकं मग्गं दुःख उपसंगामिनं दुःख दुःख का उत्पाद तथा दुःख का अतिक्रमण एवं आर्य अष्टांगिक मार्ग जो दुःख के उपशमन की ओर ले जाता है एतं खो शरणं खेमं एतं शरणं उत्तमं एतं शरणं आगम्य सब दुःखापमुच्यति यह शरण क्षेमवान है यह शरण उत्तम है यह शरण लेने से सभी दुखों से मुक्ति होती है। अब हमारी प्रारंभिक वंदना अर्पणा एवं त्रिरत्नों की अनुसूतियों के उपरांत एवं रिफ्लेक्शन के पाठ के उपरांत हमारे बीच में बनते अमरासिरी उपस्थित है। सो वी वेलकम यू अगेन वंस अगेन बनते जी, मोस्ट वेलकम। और बनते अमरासिरी के बारे में परिचय थोड़ा सा हम लोग को प्राप्त जो हुआ था वो चेन्नई में बड़े हुए हैं और कनाडा में उन्होंने ऑर्डिनेशन लिया है और उनके प्रिसेप्टर अजान वीर धम्मो है। सो बंते जी आपसे निवेदन है कि हमें थोड़ा सा अपने धम्माचरणी के बारे में बताएं और इसके लिए मैं आपसे रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ। थैंक यू।
नमो भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स बुद्धं धम्मं संघं गुणोत्तरं उपचयं नमस्सामि। Thank you for having me here and inviting me to come and join you all this evening. It's a kind of I'm looking at some people here, but I know there are others on the camera. So before we start, is the sound clear? Yeah.
Can I make a request to
Yes.
Vaibhav? Can you please zoom on, Bante ji? Please adjust the camera. Vaibhav? Nikhil, can you kindly pin Brahmarama?
Hello, sir. Is it fine now?
Yeah, I think it's better. Yeah.
Okay.
Nikhil, can you pin Bante ji on the screen so that we can all see him properly?
Pardon, sir.
You can pin the Dhammarama's on the screen, so that only Dhammarama comes up on the screen. You make me host, I'll do it. You make me co-host.
Ji, sir.
Yes. Yes, Bante, thank you. We can now see you clearly.
I don't see what you can see, but
Yeah.
good that it's clear. Okay. So once again, thank you so much for having me here at Dhammarama in New Delhi. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. First of all, having been born and raised in India and having benefited so much from the Buddha Dhamma, it's really wonderful to see, the Buddha Dhamma flourishing here. All thanks goes to Dar Sahab and the group of volunteers who are dedicating their time, their energy, their efforts, a large part of their lives to this endeavor. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for all of us to get together, all of us to reflect. And two of the most important aspects of a monastery come together in a place like Dhammarama. So even though this isn't a monastery, right? The first thing is community. So there's a lovely community of people here, there's another community of people online, but I'm sure there's ample opportunity to meet and to reflect and to discuss the Dhamma for mutual benefit. And as a result of these discussions, new ideas, new approaches, all of these come up. So community is a wonderful thing. And then, of course, you have Dar Sahab's guidance of years of experience. So again, a wonderful resource that leads to progress on the spiritual path. So two very, very important things. And I walked in today from the airport. Deepti ji and Deepak ji picked me up. So I came in and saw the facilities and walked into my room, and it was like walking into one of our Ajahn Chah branch monasteries. And everything was so beautifully set up. Everything was so thoughtful. Bed was made up. There was, even a universal adapter for electricity and even a razor for shaving with the guard taken off like we do in our monasteries. So when I saw all that, it's really, really heartwarming. It was a feeling of coming back home. Because usually when monks are traveling, we miss our monasteries. We miss our home monasteries, even though we travel in, like right now I'm with family. Family is still in the realm of lay life, still in the realm of many worries, many concerns, thoughts, etc. Whereas the feel of a monastery is very different. So when I walked into Dhammarama today and saw the room being set up with so much of kindness, consideration, thoughtfulness. It felt like coming back home to a monastery. So once again, Anumodana for being so thoughtful and so warm and welcoming. Dar Sahab came and we had a little chat this evening. It was wonderful meeting him in person. So then I was told that this evening's session would be a little bit of an introductory session. So, a little bit about me, a little bit about the monastery where I come from, and so on. And then we can open the floor for questions and answers. So as I was introduced, my name is Bhante Amarasiri. I reside in a monastery called Tisarana Buddhist Monastery, which is part of the Ajahn Chah Sangha. And Tisarana is situated about 3.5 hours west of Toronto and about an hour and a half east of Ottawa. So it's in Ontario. And our abbot and my upajjhaya is Lumpur Viradhammo, one of Lumpur Cha's senior Western disciples. Lumpur Pasanno, Lumpur Thiradhammo, Lumpur Viradhammo, all of them kind of ordained at the same year. So they all have the same basa. So it's wonderful to have such a senior teacher to look up to learn from, to live with. He brings the word Lumpur to life. So the word Lumpur in Thai means venerable father. So he's it's something really special having him at the monastery. So a little bit about Tisarana, and again, it'll be impossible to talk of Tisarana without speaking about Ajahn Viradhammo, or Lumpur Viradhammo as he's known. So Tisarana was started in 2006 when Lumpur Viradhammo came to look after his mother in Ottawa. So Lumpur Viradhammo ordained in Thailand and had started his monastic life at Wat Papong and sent to different branch monasteries in the Ajahn Chah tradition. And then when Lumpur Sumedho was asked to move to England, Lumpur Viradhammo and 3 other monks accompanied him there. And so it was a sangha of about 4 people living in London. So Lumpur Viradhammo was instrumental in starting instrumental in helping to start Chithurst, Hanam, which is Aruna Ratnagiri, Amaravati, and then the monastery in New Zealand. And so during this long stint away, his parents were aging, and one day his mom had a fall, and so he decided to come to Ottawa to take care of her. So what he thought would be a short visit culminated in him taking care of his mom for about 9 years. So during this period, a group of lay people invited him and asked him to open a monastery, and invited him to Tisarana, basically to start Tisarana. So that's how Tisarana started. Ajahn Viradhammo would still travel between Ottawa and Perth, which is Perth, Ontario, which is where Tisarana is. And he'd spend the week with his mother and then come to Tisarana over the weekends. And Ajahn Kusalo was the abbot at that time, right? So that's how Tisarana started. Initially, it was on 108 acres of wooded lands. So it wasn't fully forested, but it was new growth forest. And there were a few kutis, and then now it's grown. We bought an adjacent property about 3-4 years ago, thanks to the generosity of supporters in Thailand. And so now there's about 130 60 odd acres, a few kutis. We're a very small Sangha. There's of course Lumpur Viradammo, Ajahn Pavaro, myself, Bante Sirimedo, then we have a Samanera and 2 Anagarikas. Now, in the West, for monasteries that are kind of fairly remote, you always need 2 lay people, 1 or 2 lay people to live there. Because there are lots of things monks can't do, right? We can't drive, we can't store food, we can't cook food. We're fairly dependent on lay people for a lot of things. So we have 2 stewards staying there at the Sarana as well. So that's a little bit about the Sarana and the setup. So like you all know, I'm from India. Very glad and proud to be from India. Born and raised in the southern part of India, Chennai. And while growing up, I grew up in a family that was kind of progressive, but at the same time very traditional. So it was a kind of a mix, right? All the festivals and ritual observances, all of those would be followed, but you know, they were kind of progressive in other ways. But while growing up, there was always a lot of religion, ritual, and spirituality around me. So there was always, you know, various samanas from the Hindu tradition coming home and various swamis and sannyasins visiting and things like that. So right from a young age, I was introduced to this idea of the kashaya, you know, the ochre robe, kasayavata. And so while we were growing up, you know, people would ask my brother and me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my brother would say, I want to be a pilot. And I would say, I want to be a sannyasin. So this kind of, I suppose it didn't go down very well with a lot of my relatives. Some were very, very supportive. So right from a young age, the aspiration for renunciation was always there. I don't know why, I don't know how, this was just there, right? And it was always a very, very comfortable aspiration. It wasn't an ambition, it wasn't something that was driven, it didn't have much kind of energy behind it, but it was just there, it was always there. And it was a thought that gave me a lot of comfort, okay? Now, what happens is as we grow up, certain voices get amplified and certain voices get toned down. So as I started going to school and going to college and going to university, this voice of wanting to be a renunciant was getting toned down, and these other worldly voices of education, career, success, family, all of these started getting amplified. Right? But that voice was never really lost. And I've always had a very comfortable career, very blessed to have really good bosses and really good co-workers. So it was, so for me, it wasn't, life was always good. You know, I had enough of everything. It was never abundant, but I was never wanting for anything. So my career was going well. My family, I'm really blessed to be born into the family I'm born in. They've been a huge support. My parents, my brother, uncles and aunts, cousins, they've always been huge supports in whatever I've done. So even though all of these conditions were really, really good, there was always something lacking. Lumpo Biradammo has this beautiful talk that's titled, So What? Right? So he'd say any experience he'd had, he'd say, so what? What's the big deal? So that's how life felt for me as well. Like, yeah, everything's good, but this can't be it. That's it, just this. So not out of a sense of greed or out of a sense of, but out of, a true inquisitive question. It was truly existential. Like, is this all there is to life? And as luck would have it, or probably my blessings, I never got married, never owned a house. So all of those various kinds of things that could have been tricky to get out of if I were to become a renunciant, none of those obstacles were there. So I was living in different parts of the world, moving to different countries, having various experiences with my career, having a good time, but yet always feeling the sense of lack. Yeah, there's always something missing. There's always, just like, this can't be it, that kind of feeling. And over time, that feeling started getting stronger and stronger. And very often the voice of renunciation would come back. But outside of Buddhism, like especially in Hinduism, the avenues for monastic life are very, very limited, right? You have the Ramakrishna mission, or you have the more traditional monastic schools that were set up by Adi Shankara and things like that. But, you had to live, you would have had to have lived in a certain way, trained in a certain way, schooled in a certain way. So a lot of people get, the entry bar is really high. So for someone like me who had studied in an English medium school, someone who had never kind of been trained very deeply in the rituals and Vedic rites and things like that, the opportunity for me to get into one of those traditional monastic lineages was completely out. And for whatever reason, the Ramakrishna mission was it was a very familiar place to go. It was a very familiar tradition to plug into, but I don't know why, but I was never motivated to go in and join them as a monastic. So then, I moved to different parts of the world and then finally moved to Canada in 2009. So my contract, I was working in Dubai and my contract there ended and I had a choice. I could either go back to India or move to Canada. Family situations made me decide to move to Canada. So I moved to Canada and as a new immigrant, no job, right? So I thought, okay, this is the perfect time to do a Goenka G 10-day retreat, Vipassana retreat. So I did the Vipassana retreat and it really changed my life. Coming in contact with a systematic method of meditation really changed my life. So right through this period of moving here and moving there, I was always reading and learning a lot. So I'd read a lot of Advaita Vedanta. I'd read a lot of Rumi. I'd read Kabir. I'd read some of the Upanishads, things like that. And always left with the feeling, oh, this is great. This is wonderful. But how do I get there? Like, what do I do? Right? This is all lovely to hear, but what's the path? What's the way to get there? I found that that question really nagging very loudly, and that was never answered till I did a Goenka retreat. So doing Anapanasati, getting in touch with sensations in the body, really opened up a lot of facets within me, gave me a much deeper understanding. And then I could say, okay, so this is what leads me to where I want to be. Right? So I kept going back and doing many other Vipassana courses. And slowly this voice of renunciation started getting its volume back, started getting its amplification back. And so I would go to different monastic institutions, different temples all over Toronto. I would interact with monks. But again, none of them kind of really gave me the level of comfort to say, okay, this is where I want to be. Right? Now, it's not that I had any kind of really specific list as to this has to be checked off or that has to be checked off. No, I never had that kind of outlook when I was going to these different temples. But somehow it just wasn't right. The fit just wasn't right. So finally, Ajahn Brahm was visiting Toronto. And my doctor was the person who was sponsoring Ajahn Brahm to come to Toronto. Now, as some of you may know, Ajahn Brahm was a student of Lumpur Cha. So Ajahn Brahm came to Toronto and he spoke about the Dhamma Vinaya. Right? So in all of the various monasteries and temples I was going to, they would always speak about the Dhamma. They would never really reference the Vinaya. So Ajahn Brahm started talking about the Dhamma Vinaya, and then he started talking about the Thai forest tradition, started talking about Lumpur Cha, and then I said, oh, wow, this sounds really interesting. You know, it's got discipline, it's got the teachings, you know, it's the real deal. So at the end of the retreat, I went to him and said, you know, I'm really interested, and how do I learn more about this tradition or this kind of Sangha? And he said, well, go and see my friend Ajahn Viradhammo in Perth, Ontario. And there's this monastery there called Tisarana. So he told me that on a Wednesday afternoon, and I was at Tisarana on Friday evening. And right at my first visit, you know, it was so impressive. Like the place, the feeling about the place, you know, how silent it is, how neat, orderly, things like that. It was very impressive. Now that evening, Lumpur was away teaching in Ottawa, so I couldn't meet him then, but I met him the next morning. And then and there, something told me, you know, you found your teacher. This is where you've got to ordain. This is what you have to do. So the decision was made. Again, there was no checklist. There was no, is this right? Is that right? That was actually the first Theravadan monastery I had ever visited. So I had no clue about, you know, what a Theravadan monastery should be like. I had no clue about Theravada, but something just felt absolutely right with that decision. And I put my name down on the waiting list, gave myself 3 years, but things just started moving so quickly. I was able to wrap up everything in about 1.5 years, and September 2016, I joined Tisarana. Now, the system of training in Western monasteries is slightly different to how training is done in Thailand, right? And that's partly because Thai culture, Thai society is so supportive, and it's steeped in this culture of Theravada and it's steeped in this culture of monasticism. But then if you're looking at a monastery in rural Ontario, there's none of that background. There's none of that there's none of that societal support. There's none of that backbone to kind of help with the other things. So what we do is, if someone's interested in ordination, then they come and visit the monastery and they keep coming back over many weekends or over many visits to kind of form a rapport between Ajahn Viradhammo and them, and then the Sangha and them, the other lay people and them. And after having done that probably 4 or 5 times, they are invited to come and serve a winter retreat. So our monastery is completely closed from January to end of March. The monks, the Samaneras and the Anagarikas, they're all on retreat at that time. So we get a group of people who come and volunteer to serve the winter retreat. So if someone's very interested in ordination, we tell them, okay, come and serve the winter retreat, because we've already observed them when the monastery is fully active. But winter retreat is when there's a lot of solitude, there's a lot of silence. So we've got to actually test the candidate and see if the candidate can actually do well in both community busy settings as well as solitude, silent settings. So that's why we get them. And then if they do well there, then they request to become Anagarikas, and they're on 8 precepts wearing white robes. And that training usually lasts for about a year. At the end of the year, all going well, everyone's happy, they still want to progress, then they ask for Pabaja. They take on the ochre robe and they become Samaneras with 10 precepts. And that training lasts for about a year. And finally, they ask for Upasampada. The community meets, everyone discusses. The bhikkhus sit down and discuss the request, and we come to a decision. And so by then, usually the candidate, has to, he would have spent 2 years there and be familiar with everything. So at that point, it's rare that it's a no at that point. But this is the kind of training that we follow in most Western monasteries. Of course, each monastery differs a little bit here and there, and each abbot does things differently. But that's that's the kind of training, and that's the kind of path that most of us take. At least that's the path we all take at the Sarana. So if renunciation or living the renunciant life is a core aspiration for someone, then it's very important for us to get to know that person and see whether that person's ideas of the life of a renunciant actually matches with reality. Because very often what happens is that people come with varied ideas, different kinds of expectations, different kinds of theories behind how a monastery should be, how a monastery should be run, etc., etc. And when they actually come into contact with the reality, right? When they're actually in situ, they are in a monastery, they're in the midst of a sangha, they're in the midst of a group of lay people living and working there, then all of these ideas and thoughts and expectations get challenged. And that's exactly the most important teaching that I have gained out of monastic life. It's not about an approach of what I can get from the system, what I can get from the monastery, what I can get from the teacher, but it's more a sense of what I have been able to let go of. Where can I serve? What can I do to be useful? And those are the attitudes we look for in any aspiring monastic. And that's exactly the beauty of our system, because Lumpur Cha, everyone, all the senior Ajahns always keep saying how important community life was for Lumpur Cha, and how he would always stress community life. And life in one of our Ajahn Chah monasteries really brings that out. Because what happens is, it's not like a retreat center. So you don't go and you don't sit and meditate for 12 hours a day. Your food is not brought to you. You know, there's a work period. You've got to interact with people. You've got to help do the dishes. You've got to wash your own clothes. You've got to clean your own kuti. And in the meanwhile, you still have to come for morning chanting and evening chanting, come for the other communal activities. So it can get really, really busy, right? It can get absolutely, sometimes even frustrating. My God, I did not come here to do this. But that's the challenge, right? Okay, you didn't come here to do it, but you're here now. What are you going to do? Are you going to pack your bags and walk away, or are you going to take this on? And I think that's what community life does. That's what monastic life does, is that it helps you push boundaries just that little further than you thought you could go, right? We don't do any, we're not Shaolin monks. We don't do anything really hard or things like that. But just to think, oh, okay, I took that. Someone could have been really rude to you, or someone you would have said something and people could have totally mistaken you, or you could have a terrible work period with this one person who you just did not want to work with. But then, you look back and you say, I did that. Wasn't that bad? Oh, so I can do that. I can do things like that. So it instills a sense of confidence in you as well, right? And along with that kind of sense of confidence, there's also a feeling of belonging. You live in a monastery, you're there for a while, you get to know the people get to know you, so your quirks are known, their quirks are known by you. So then life becomes a little more comfortable. But it's always a process, right? And what's important is, along with the idea that, monastic life is not a life of ambition. Like, it's not there for people to get something. It's not there for people to become something. But it's an opportunity of letting go. It's an opportunity of witnessing. It's an incredible privilege, where we are protected by the set of rules that's called the Vinaya, the Patimokkha, and then the wider scope of discipline that's called the Vinaya. So that's always there as a protection. So, you can't cross that boundary. But within that boundary, there's absolute freedom. There's very little choice in a monastery, right? So we don't decide, today I feel like wearing a yellow shirt, or I feel like wearing slacks, or I feel like wearing jeans. No, this is our uniform. This is what we wear. This is our hairdo. Like, everyone gets the same hairdo. In the meal, we follow seniority, right? So there's no kind of jostling who goes first, who goes next. So life is really simplified. Not much choice in a monastery. And as a result of which, there is tremendous freedom in the mind and in the heart to actually, when the mind is not busy with all of these things, with all of these choices, then it has a lot of freedom and a lot of scope to actually witness what's going on in the present moment. The bandwidth suddenly increases, right? So there's a feeling of, okay, I'm available, I'm here, I'm going to watch what's going on. And to be able to have an environment that actually acts as a home, as a true home, as a refuge where you can sit and watch what goes on in your heart and in your mind is an incredible privilege. It's not easily available outside. So whether it's Tisarana or whether it's Dhammarama, you could create those conditions for yourself. Right? The true monastery is not out there, but the true monastery is in here. Right? Make that your true refuge. So, you know, the kind of encouragement is, Thomas Merton actually wrote this line, and it's a beautiful line. He said, not everyone can be a monk or a nun, but there's a little bit of the monk and the nun in everyone. You know, and that's so true. So you know, the idea is, even if you cannot live the life of a renunciant, bring the idea of renunciation into your life. It'll do a lot of good. So see which parts of life can be simplified, where you can cut down on choices. So don't give yourself a lot of choice. You know, make your decisions simpler, make decisions easier. And then you'll start really appreciating all the bandwidth you get out of a free mind. And that's one of the key elements of monastic life, along with community, along with training with people, along with hierarchy, along with respect. And of course, there's Kalyana Mittata. You know, monastic life just would not work if we didn't have good friends on the path. And exactly how lay groups function as well, right? Like without good friends, without people who you can go and talk to, without people who you can consult with, without elders who are there to guide you, this kind of progress just wouldn't be possible. So that's a little bit of an introduction about me and where I come from and background of Tisarana. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask, and yeah, we can open it to the floor.
Thank you, Bhanteji. It's quite fascinating to know your story, to your journey, and you talking about Kabir, Rumi, and then Advait. It's also, we can very much correlate. Thank you so much, and letting us know the Western way of monastery. This is very informative. Now, as Bhanteji said, floor is open for the question and answer. तो अगर किसी को कोई प्रश्न हो तो आप हैंड रेज कर सकते हैं वर्चुअल में, अगर वहां पर है धम्मारामा में है तो वो स्ट्रेट में पूछ सकते हैं. Bhante, I have one question, if I can. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So one very obvious question, that you said that you had intention since your childhood, and once you decided, so what was the reaction from the family?
That's a very interesting question. Luckily, I got complete support from my parents. So I've been toying with this idea of becoming a monk. So about 1.5 years before joining Tisarana, I started shaving my head. And though I had given up I used to have a drink socially, and I used to smoke occasionally. But about 2 to 3 years before that, all that was wound down. So my lifestyle, there was a distinct change in my lifestyle. So my family could see, okay, something's up with this guy. So then when it was time, Lumpur said, okay, you got to call your parents and get their permission. My dad kind of said, yes, if that's what you want to do, we support you. At the end of the day, you have to be happy. So he was very supportive. Then my mother came on the line. So I was in Toronto and I was calling them on the phone. Mom came on the line and she said something really interesting. She said, I'll give you permission on one condition. So I said, sure, what's the condition? She said, well, if you do this for life. If you don't do this for life, I'm not giving you my consent. So that kind of came as a shock, but I said, yeah, sure, hopefully can do it for life. So yeah, that's the reaction from my parents. In general, it's unfortunate. The idea of someone becoming a renunciant, right, is not taken very well in most societies. Like in India, you see all these sannyasins and sadhus and fakirs, and people have great respect for them. They go and feed them, they prostrate before them, they fall at their feet, they ask them for advice. But if their son or someone in the family wants to become a renunciant, the immediate response is, oh, no, anyone but my son. That kind of, that's the immediate response. And over time, what has happened is a renunciation either becomes a retirement plan or it becomes something that people do when they have failed at something in life, so the idea in general that I've kind of encountered is that, okay, you live your life, you get married, you have a family, you fulfill all those responsibilities. And then when you're towards the twilight of your life, then you can become a renunciant, right? That's the most often heard description or expectation of renunciation. Or the other thing is, oh my God, you've become a monk. Why, were you not happy with your career? Didn't you do well in life? Did you have a very painful love affair, or were you hurt? So it's always this kind of looking at renunciants in a kind of way that they're running away from something, or they're going away from something. But no, that's not. Renunciation can come out of. It needn't come out of, say, the limitations of old age, neither out of the pressure of failure. It can actually come out of intentions during times of plenty, when someone has a good career, when someone's really happy, then when someone wants to renounce, it can happen too. And that's important. If you take the life of the Buddha, that's what happened, right? The Buddha was actually, he was at a key moment in his life. He'd gotten married, he had a child, his father was old, obviously he was heir to the throne, so he was going to be the king. He had all of this going for him, yet he chose renunciation, right? So I think it's really important to look at renunciation that way, that yes, to quote Ajahn Amaro, do send your best and your brightest. It's not that renunciation is a second choice. So yeah, to answer your question, I was very lucky that a lot of my family and those who really mattered supported me. But very often it's a struggle for a lot of monastic aspirants. And
Thank you.
yeah, please.
Thank you, Bhante. One more question I got. The question is, will you be ready to come to be part of the forthcoming monastery that is being planned in north of India?
I've made a promise to myself that, being with my Upajaya and being at the Sarana would be part of the long-term plan that I foresee for myself at the moment. So, I definitely love to visit now and again and help in any other way I can. But yeah, you put me on the spot there.
No, that's actually asked by Anisi. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
That was asked by the Anisi.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Bhante, for answering.
Yeah,
Thank
you're welcome. Okay. Any other questions?
Um, I just wanted to make a remark for all of us that your lay name was Siddharth, incidentally.
Yeah. Yeah, and an interesting thing is that apparently when I was born, they made my horoscope, and the person who wrote the horoscope out warned my family that I'd be a renunciant. And I had no idea about that till my mother told me after my Pabaja. So, yeah, coincidence.
So, Bhante, a question, from what you said, I gather that your family was following a particular tradition. And while your parents gave their consent, what do you see the role of tradition and, the conflict of ideas and thoughts, especially when one is making that move? That could be just for an individual also, because they're moving from one kind of environment into another. Or it could be from the people who are influencing that individual who's now moving into another environment.
It's an opportunity for reflection. It's an opportunity for inquiry. It needs a lot of courage, because ideas that are familiar to you, ideas that you're comfortable with, do get challenged. But there's always things you can learn when you're comparing two things. And they need not be mutually exclusive. So in my own case, the kind of teachings we get from Lumpur Sumedo, Lumpur Viradammo, most of our ajans, most of our Kruba ajans, I don't find that it has any kind of conflict with Advaita Vedanta. So sometimes it's also a question of actually understanding what the teaching is trying to convey. So you might read a translation and it might give you a certain picture, but being with it, reflecting on it, going a little deeper, and actually trying to apply it to oneself. So when there's a teaching, see how that teaching actually applies to your personal life. That exercise becomes a tremendously valuable exercise. And so whether it's a monastic aspirant who wants to move from one religion to another, or a layperson who's grown up in one tradition and has to move to another tradition, it's important to have the confidence to look at these things in depth, and to be with that feeling of discomfort, to be with that feeling of doubt. Because it's only out of that feeling of doubt and discomfort, it's only out of that clarity can actually arise. Because if doubt didn't exist in the first place, then there's no need or no room for clarity. So very often patience, be patient with the inquiry and let it unfold and see where that takes you. But again, there's no one answer or one universal answer to that question, or because each one's circumstances are unique, each one's understanding is unique, each one's mind frame is unique. So reactions are also different. Unique.
There is a hand raised by Deepak Suriji. Deepak Suriji, can ask.
Yes. Thank you, Ajahn, for such a wonderful presentation to us about your various aspects of life. I only wanted to know that you mentioned first you had a Goenkaji's retreat, and you felt a lot transformed. But then eventually when you got exposed to Thai tradition, you really joined it. So what is that different aspect of Thai tradition which made you switch over from Vipassana's Goenkaji's technique to the Thai technique?
Deepak ji, that's a very, very interesting question. And please don't call me Ajahn. Bante is good for now. What's the difference between Goenkaji and the Thai forest tradition? Well, first of all, I have incredible gratitude to Goenkaji and the various retreats I've attended, the kind of organization he has set up and the kind of service they do is fantastic. I think a lot of us here started with Goenkaji. So what happens is that the platform is superb. The foundation is superb. You can actually sit for an hour. You're familiar with discomfort. You're familiar with awareness of sensations. You're familiar with breath, working with breath. So all of the spade work is done. Where I was motivated to look outside was, I think I was looking for a lifestyle and I was not looking for just a technique. So I needed I needed community. B, I needed guidance, a teacher who I can rely on and who I can relate to. So, and because of my personality, I think these were key ingredients that played a huge role, that continue playing a huge role in my spiritual evolution and my spiritual journey, whatever you want to say. And these were exactly the things that were missing when I was with Goenkaji's organization. There was community, but in a very limited sense. There was guidance, but in a very, very stratified, in a kind of very restrictive sense. And so when I came across a monastery where, you know, it's Vaibhav and I were talking this evening, and he said, you know, the first thing that he recognized when he went into Nanachat was community and harmony. Right? Everything is done based on community and based on harmony. So it's not about you and you sitting down and meditating and how good your Anapanasati is or how good your Vipassana is, but it's more about putting the other person first. You know, what can I do for him? What can I do for the community? And that is a huge reward that brings up feelings of gratitude, that brings up feelings of metta, that brings up all kinds of really lovely feelings. And that's what gets missed out in a technique, right? And that's what gets missed out in a retreat center, because in a retreat center, the goal is different. In monastic life, the goal is completely different. So I'd say that's what really motivated me to look outside the Goenkaji tradition. And those were exactly the things that the Thai forest monastery with Lumpur Veeradhammo at the Sarana were able to provide for me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, Deepak ji. Any questions from the floor?
So Bhante, you talked quite a lot about, renunciation and monasticism. If we talk of our own group here, most of us possibly will not make the choice or do not even want to make that choice. But you also pointed out that the monastery is within oneself. So if you could share some thoughts around that also, Bhante.
Absolutely. So monasticism, being a monk, living in a monastery is a model, right? It's a container, and the container presents contents to us for us to make use of in our spiritual quest and in our spiritual path. It's definitely fast-tracked because there are less distractions. Like I mentioned, there's less choice. There's a certain structure. So all of these become really good supports and really good springboards from which the spiritual journey can either begin or continue, or so then if you don't make that choice, then what can you do, right? I think this is where you look at the model of monasticism and actually see how you can apply that model in your life. So the Buddha, in his teachings, he said that there's a set of 3 things that you could do. And and these 3 things are called the Appannaka Patipada. Panha is question, Appanha is unquestioned, Patipada, the practices. So if you practice these, the efficacy, you can't question the efficacy. You can't question the result. You certainly can't question the benefit, right? So the first thing that he advises is Indriya Samvara. Now, whether you're a monastic or whether you're a lay person, we can all definitely bring Indriya Samvara into our lives and into our attitudes, right? It's more a question of attitude than a question of action, because all our actions are fed by intention, fed by attitude. So if we try and cultivate a sense of Indriya Samvara in whatever we do, right? Indriya Samvara is usually translated as sense restraint. So restraining the senses, not allowing them to run wild, not allowing them to run amok. The mind sent outside is the cause, the result of the mind sent outside is suffering, that kind of thing. So bringing some kind of restraint into your life, an attitude of restraint. I think that's very, very important. For my personal practice, I don't stop with the restraint, because the word samvara, sang is with, vara is excellent. So instead of looking at Indriya Samvara as sense restraint, I look at attuning senses towards excellence, right? So if your mind really wants to go out, or if you're really tempted to go and grab something, what's the high road? It's not going and grabbing it. It's actually staying away from it and moving towards an attitude of renunciation. Okay, I don't need that right now. I'm happy as I am, right? So Indriya Samvara. The second practice that the Buddha always, beautiful to bring into our attitudes and to try and use it and apply it in our day-to-day lives, is bhojane mattanyuta. Bhojane mattanyuta is quite literally translated as eating little, eating less, or knowing the measure at the meal. Mattanyuta is knowing the measure, bhojane is at the meal. So you know how much you need, right? But this isn't just about food, is it? It's about any kind of consumption. It could be watching your iPad. It could be watching a movie, or it could be just, eating that second cone of ice cream, having your fourth beer, whatever, not that I condone having beer, but it's just an example. But yes, know the limit, right? So restraining one's senses, moving them towards excellence, then finding moderation in consumption. So it's not just about food, it's about what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste. So that doesn't mean you should go and live under a rock or live in a cave, right? That's not the idea here at all. But the idea is actually to find that optimum level, right? What Lumpur Cha says, 4D, in Thai, just right, just enough. That kind of bhojane matanyuta. So consumption, moderation and consumption. And finally, Jagariyanu Yoga, which is having an attitude of alertness and awareness all the time. So being absolutely present in being absolutely present in this very moment, right? Being attentive, being involved, having a sense of spacious awareness of everything that goes on around you. Which, in other words, is just kind of, being here. Don't kind of wander off into la la land. Try and make an effort of engaging with what's going on here and now. Being plugged in, or as Lumpo Viradhammo would say, open and available, right? Being present. So yes, even if one is not one doesn't want to pursue a life of a monastic, even if one is not inspired to take on that role, you can definitely cultivate an attitude of renunciation in our lives, and I think that's why we end up having a spiritual quest, and the irony is we find a lack in our lives, and we try and fill that lack with everything material, but nothing material can fill that lack. What can fill that lack is actually letting go of what you have. So it's not a question of filling the hole, it's a question of expanding it. It's a question of letting go. It's a question of, being open, being spacious. So that's what I'd say.
Bandhiji, I have one more question from Sanil. She want to ask, kindly mention the writings or the books that introduced you to the Buddhism. Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
Kindly mention the writings or books that introduced you to the Buddhism.
I just did a Goenka course, that's it. I didn't read very much. I got really interested and I started reading after I became an Anagarika, actually. But yeah, I mean, what I would recommend is Stillness Flowing. If you want a contextual understanding of the Ajahn Chah Sangha and about monastic life, Stillness Flowing is a great resource. And I've read that many times over, but that did not lead me to Buddhism. Then the other book that I would strongly recommend, if you would like a firm theoretical grounding in Buddhism, is called the book is called Buddha Dhamma, and that's written by Prapayutto. Both of these are available online and for free download. So I would strongly suggest either of these two books. Yeah. Sorry? Buddha Dhamma. It's called Buddha Dhamma, and by Prapayutto. Very well respected, renowned Ajahn in Thailand. And actually that book is so good that Ajahn Jayasaro writes in the foreword that if he were to be stranded on a desert island and were allowed to take one book, he would actually take Buddha Dhamma. So you can't get better validation than that. Does that answer your question?
Bhante, yes. And one hand is raised by Sampreet. Samrit.
Samrit, yeah.
Yeah. So please ask.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Bhante. How are you?
Very good.
Thank you for your enriching talk. Actually, I'm visiting also India. I know, I think I've been in touch with you through email before. I also stay in Canada, but I'm visiting here for a while and I'll be returning in Jan.
Oh, right. Samrit, from Niagara Falls area?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Lovely to have you here.
Oh, likewise. And it was very enriching talk. Thank you so much. My query was, how do you handle conflicts if they happen at all in a monastery? Like in terms of, even if everybody is following within the monastic rules, like the differences of opinion, because all those things can really lead to sometimes resentments. And so how do you handle those in a monastic life, and what all those things you can learn to implement in the lay life?
Again, very good question. Thank you, Samrit. Monastic life comes with its share of problems. First of all, it's a group of men. Usually it's a group of capable men. And usually it's a group of men who have ideas and opinions. So there's bound to be conflict and there's bound to be friction. The whole concept of a monastery is that contact causes friction, but friction also causes smoothness. So all the rough edges are worn off after a certain period of time. We do have conflict, and it's very natural for disagreements to arise. It's very natural for even anger to arise, because I mean, at the end of the day, we are human beings in robes, right? We practice, we strive, we dedicate our lives to the Dhamma, but at the end of the day, we are still human beings. So open to failing, open to making mistakes, open to being stupid, open to a lot of things. But what's important is, once something arises, then what do you do with it? So that's an encouragement we are often given. So if there's anger that's coming up, sure, there is anger coming up. There's nothing wrong in that anger arising. But then what do you do with it? Do you take it and spew it out? Do you find a target and then attack that target? Do you blame other people? Or do you take full responsibility and say, okay, this anger has arisen and I'll deal with it? Now, having said that, we do have quite a refined life. We lead quite a refined life in terms of behavior, in terms of relationships, in terms of interactions, in terms of communication. So there's a lot of refinement in the way we act, in the way we say things. And that's probably, you probably wouldn't find that very much outside the environment of a good monastery. So we do have that safeguard, but we do have conflict as well. The quick and easy answer is, can you take that conflict and learn from it? Can you take that conflict and use that as fertile ground for cultivation? Or do you just run with it and make a mess of things? Right. So there have been instances where people make a mess and, they run with it. People get angry and they might say something they regret, but there's always a mechanism to go back and say, I'm sorry. And I'm willing to make amends. And the amends that I'll make is that I would never repeat this behavior, or I'll try never to repeat this behavior. So conflict is natural and it does exist, but it's more how conflict is handled and what comes out of that conflict, rather than trying to be the perfect human being or the perfect community and the perfect kind of group of peers who'll never have conflict, who never have misunderstandings, because that just would never happen anyway. Does that answer your question, Samrit, or do you have a follow-up?
Yes, yeah, mostly yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, it becomes really difficult. I mean, when you're in with the same level of people in the monastic, it's easier, but in lay life, it becomes really difficult at times, like because not everybody is at the same wavelength.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you don't want to spew out your anger, but at the same time, there are certain things other people are doing not justified. So it becomes really hard to navigate through those situations.
Absolutely. And what happens is, some different people have different standards. Some people have higher standards, some people have lower standards. So that itself could be cause for an irregular playing field. And but again, the idea is not to capitulate. The idea is not to be a doormat. Definitely, leading a spiritual life is also a life of courage. So it's not that you take whatever is doled out to you, or you take whatever is dished out to you. There is a time that you could be firm without being offensive, and that's very important. That's a skill to learn even in the monastic life as well, because you do have instances where people could be senior to you and you really can't say anything against them, but they do or say things that are not quite comfortable. So it's a skill. It's that skill. It's cultivating that skill of being firm yet being respectful, and being honest. I think that's really important. Really being honest about one's feelings.
Because the hardest part is like when you're really confronting somebody and setting your boundaries, you are angry in those moments, but you are trying to be polite, but still that anger, and it shows up on your face. It's becomes so difficult to dissociate yourself from that anger and set those healthy boundaries, because at that times you are firm, but at times that anger, even some remnants of that anger are there. So that's really difficult to control.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, don't do it right then and there. Do it later. Give your anger a chance to settle. That could be one thing that's very useful.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So it's almost 8:30, and I think we end at 8:30, right? Deepti?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Are there any other questions, Nikhil?
No, I don't see any questions. So maybe we can request Bhanteji for Karniya Mitta Sutta.
Any blessings?
For the chanting.
Oh, Karaniya Mitta Sutta. So please, if do you put it up on screen?
Yes, Nikhil, will you put it up on the screen, please, for everyone? It's up there.
Okay, so let's face the shrine and we'll chant the Karaniya Mitta Sutta and finish with the closing comment. हरणीयमत्तकुशलेन यं तं संतं पदं अभिसमे च सक्को उजु च सुहुजु च सुवचो च समुदु अनतिमानि संतुसको च सुभरो च अपकिच्चो च सल्लहुकवूति संतीन्द्रियो च निपको च अपगभ्भो कुलेषु अननुगेद्धो न च कुद्धं समाचरे किञ्चियेन विंयुपरे उपवधेयुं सुखिनो वा खेमिनो होन्तु सब्बे सत्ता भवन्तु सुखितथा ये केचिपाणभूतातितसा वा तावरा वा अनवशेषा दीर्घा वा ये महन्ता वा मज्झिमारस्सका अनुकतूलादित्था वा ये च दित्था ये च दूरे वसन्ति अविधूरे भूता वा संभवेसि वा सब्बे सत्ता भवन्तु सुखितथा न परोपरं निकुभ्येत नत्थिमन्ये तकत्तचिनं किञ्चिभियारोसना पठिगसंज्ञा नम यमन्यस दुःखमे चेयमाता नियं पुत्तं आयुषाये कपुत्तमनुरखे एवं पिसब्बभूतेषु मानसं भावये अपरिमाणं मेत्तं च सब्बलोकस्मिन् मानसं भावये अपरिमाणं बुद्धं अधोचतिरियं च असंबाधं अवेरं असपठं तिष्ठं चरन् निसिन्नो वा सयानो वा यावत स विगतमिद्धो एतं सतिं अदिठेय ब्रह्ममेतं विहारं इदमाहुदिष्टिं चानुपगं मशीलवादसनेन सम्पन्नो कामेषु विनयगेद्धं न हि जातु गभ्भसेयं पुनरेतीति। अरहं सम्मा सम्बुद्धो भगवान् बुद्धं भगवन्तं अभिवादेमि। स्वाक्षातो भगवता धम्मो धम्मं नमस्सामि। सुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावकसङ्घो संघं नमामि। Bows to our teachers.
Let us pay our respect to Bhanteji by bowing down 3 times. Pranam. Dutiyampi. Tritiyampi. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bhante ji.
Thank you. Thank you, Bandeji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhante ji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Deji, thank you very much.
Bandeji.